Wow, I am so pleased to bring Geoff Bott to all of you. Really, when I think of Author's Corner, I think of authors and stories. He is absolutely the one. He's written a couple of books. His first one, Uphill, was about the battles that he faced with so many different surgeries after being a superstar, really in high school rugby, and how did that affect his life? And then Biological Deception is his second book, which is so intriguing. And it's so interesting how he went from one to the other. And his story is fascinating. He grew up in England, came to the United States. He's got dual citizenship. He did that whole swearing in thing. And I know he's proud of that. We talked off the air. And boy, and what he's been able to do too with his company and everything else is absolutely fascinating. So thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Kate. I'm honored and privileged to be here. So I appreciate the offer to come onto your show. I'm proud, actually. So thank you.
Let's talk about, first of all, what happened to you with rugby. Were you always a sports kid? Were you just rabidly interested in all sports?
I was. How long do we have? About 2 hours, I think you said, right? No, I'm kidding. But yeah, I was a tremendous athlete in high school. I had a lot of accolades. When I was 17 years old, I lived in a city called Hull in England, and I was Hull School's champion at 100 and 200 meters. And I went to soccer trials. I was a tremendous goalkeeper in soccer, but those trials didn't go very well. So then I got invited to go to the Hull under 19 rugby trials. And I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. So I went and I got selected to play for Hull under 19. So the first match, the first, yeah, the first and only match I had, someone kicked me on the knee. And I was a rugby player, right? And I felt something go. And I walked off the field, I washed off all the blood, and this is how we behaved back in those days. They don't do that now. So I washed the blood off my knee and walked back on the field and started playing. And then I didn't think anything of it, except 2 weeks later, I'm in my family home, my parents' home, and my knee collapsed. And wow, the pain from the knee collapsing was astonishing. And so I went to see a doctor, and we had social medicine back then in England. We still do. We have that, and I'm an advocate for that. Actually, I think everyone should have healthcare. But they wouldn't do anything because it's a knee, right? It's not important. So 6 months later, I ended up having surgery through my father had private insurance, so I had surgery, and to this day, I remember waking up in the recovery room, and there was this object pickling in a jar next to my head, and I looked at it and I thought, wow, what is that? Well, that was my lateral meniscus. It was torn in half. It wasn't U-shaped anymore, it was Y-shaped. And I don't think anybody knew back then how troubling that was. I mean, it's the cushion between your bones, right? Your tibia plateau and your femoral ball there. It's your cushion. So you lose that cushion, you're in serious trouble. So yeah, but I didn't know any of that. I carried on playing sports even after I had the meniscus taken out. But I was lucky because I educated myself. I went to college. I knew I was going to college. I got a degree. So something, I don't know what, was controlling me, was telling me, go and educate yourself, forget sports. But I missed the sports. I did. I was quite a prolific athlete in school.
And with that being said, and that happening, like you said, people didn't know that much. Tell the listeners how many surgeries you've had since then.
Oh gosh, I'm on number 15 now. I had my 15th last year, but um, I didn't know until 20 years after I had my meniscus removed. I'm 20, I'm 37 now. I'm living in Lake Tahoe, and I didn't know they had world-class surgeons back then, and I was in trouble. So I had a renowned surgeon open me up. That was, I don't know how many surgeries that was at that point, number six, I think, and he opened me up, and I was expecting miracles to happen, but he said, Jeff, he said, your knee's finished. I can't do anything about it. So he stitched me back up, and In the recovery room, those were the first tears that I shed from having knee problems, and I didn't know. So I got transferred to a surgeon who replaces knees, and now I'm 38 years old, and I saw other specialists, and we decided that knee replacement was the thing to do. So I went and he was preparing me January 2002 to do a knee replacement, and he was very reluctant. I knew that, and I was too young. Back then the technology wasn't the same. It was very different. It would last 10 years, and then I'd do another one, and I'd be in very serious trouble, as I'm approaching 60. He knew I'm active. I travel a lot. I do a lot. So 4 days before the surgery, he called me up and said, Jeff, I'm not going to replace your knee. I'm not going to do it. So he transferred me I had to be transferred. I couldn't just call up this special doctor. We had to be transferred, and I got taken on as a special case. And Dr. Watson was a world-renowned surgeon, and he said, Jeff, yeah, we can do this. And I was really optimistic, and so he performed surgery. And I learned later on that this was groundbreaking experimental surgery. And he sliced open my knee. The scar's 10 inches long, and he hacksawed my knee in half. And he set it on a 15-degree angle. Well, even today, no one can figure the 15-degree angle. It makes no sense to anybody. But I made it work, except I had a complication. So 5 weeks later, I had more surgery. And then 6 months later, I rejected all that. So I had to do the femoral osteotomy again. And remember, these are massive surgeries. And then he said, Jeff, after that, I was beginning to recover. He said, Jeff, I found a cadaver meniscus. I said, great. So he inserted a cadaver meniscus. And then about 4 months later, I had all the hardware removed. So within that period of 18 months, I'd had 5 horrendous, they were massive surgeries, and I was on crutches for those 18 months, and I was in physical therapy for 2 years. And at the end of physical therapy, I walked away. I walked away not because I was finished, but because I was finished. I just literally couldn't do anymore. And they said, Jeff, you're finished. We have to replace the knee. This was May 2004. And I said, no, I'm not finished. I'm not going to go through all that and have my knee replaced. So I didn't. I held off, and the story continues. 2.5 months later, 2.5 years later, I was having trouble again. I'd just done a huge cycle ride. The surgeon said you won't be able to cycle. So, Kate, I got on my bike and I started cycling. And I live in the mountains, so I started training and cycling up mountain passes, and I did things that were astonished. The renowned medical profession was stunned at what I could do, but I wasn't going to give up. I wasn't going to go through all that and give up, and I didn't. But 2.5 years later, October 2006, I had another surgery, and I dissolved the cadaver meniscus. My body just rejected it. It was gone. It was dissolved. And even after that surgery, I had another complication. And so I had to have my 13th. At that point, I had my 13th knee surgery. And it was just shocking. It was horrendous what I went through. But I dealt with it, I fought through it. And my medical record said I rejected the rebuild surgeries. But I didn't. I worked really hard to make my knee last another 23 years. And I'm proud of that, but wow, it was horrendous. The surgeries were just massive.
Boy, I bet it was. And you talk about that in your book Uphill, and how do you keep going? It's brave, it takes courage, it really does. And to know what's coming next and not sure, is this going to be the time, and do I not have to worry after this? And then get that news, that startling news, okay, now we're going to try this. It's shot, it's done. How did you do that? How did you tackle that mentally?
Oh gosh, it was tough. I fought through that, but it wasn't we haven't. I'm sure we're going to talk about this, but it was what came after the surgeries that was devastating. It kind of, looking back now, what I went through with my surgeries. On crutches for 18 months, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about my desire, my passion, my motivation. I was motivated. I wasn't going to give up. I worked incredibly hard. You don't go through all those surgeries and come out normal. It's impossible. And you don't spend 2 years in physical therapy and not be damaged. You can't do that. It's just impossible. So I was a changed person, and I tried to find ways to overcome that. And I did with my cycling. The heroics on a bike were incredible, but I was preparing. I didn't know at the time, obviously, but I was preparing for what came after that. And what came after that, my surgeries were just nothing. It was just part of life. What came after was rip me to pieces.
Yeah, and let's talk about it that you're leading us there. What came after that?
Well, a month after I found out I rejected the knee rebuild surgeries and spent 4 years trying to save my knee, my wife filed for divorce, and I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't handle it, to be honest. I wasn't prepared for it. I couldn't, all the anesthesia, the staggering pain. I had nerve damage, and I've never had pain like nerve damage. My surgeon accidentally stuck a needle through the main nerve at the back of the knee, and I screamed for 2 weeks. They put me on drugs, and I refused to take the drugs. The side effects were worse than the pain. So I screamed through that. So anyway, a month after I rejected all the surgeries, my wife filed for divorce, and it cascaded into an absolute complete mess. And I ended up losing most things I ever worked for, but I wasn't prepared. I couldn't fight. And I turned around to her. I'm not going to fight the divorce. I couldn't physically do it. And a few years later, actually the following year in '07, I met my surgeon on the dance floor at a charity event. And we hugged on the dance floor because we knew what we'd been through. And I said to him, I said, I'm getting divorced now, right? He said, yeah, Jeff. He said, people who go through what you went through, you don't survive because you're lying there naked, not physically naked. I mean, everything is revealed, right? When you're struggling like that. And divorce was a disaster. I was given 5 minutes to get out of my house, otherwise the sheriffs would come in. My lawyer wanted to destroy his law practice. I think that's what was going on. The judge had a vendetta against my lawyer, so allowed perjury and fraud to go on. I mean, it just went on and on and on. If I knew then what I know now, I'd have been thrown in jail for contempt because I wouldn't have been able to shut my mouth in a courtroom, right? Because this stuff went on right in front of me. We're supposed to keep quiet. And wow, I appealed what was going on, and we lost that appeal at the local appellate court. And not only did we lose the appeal, but they voted to seal my document, my public records. So it's my divorce file can't be accessed. They didn't want it to be a case where other lawyers could access it because it was nuts. But anyway, I at the time when she filed, I was living the American dream. We had a beautiful home. We had a guest house. We sold the guest house before everything became irrational. And I took the money from that. Best thing I ever did. I sometimes regret doing it at the time, but I don't now. But I took the money that I had in the guest house that we split, and I bought another house, and this was March 2007. Uh, June 2007, a forest fire came through my neighborhood and destroyed my neighborhood in South Lake Tahoe. And I had my kids that weekend. I had my kids 2 weekends every month. And so I had my kids that weekend. And we went shopping one day to get some food. It was too windy for me to cycle, so I didn't cycle. And I don't cycle in mountains in the wind. I've nearly been blown off mountains from the wind. So we went shopping, and we heard people say there's a fire. We didn't know what we were talking about. House fire, a car fire. We had no idea. So we got the food. We went outside, and we saw this huge plume of smoke, and we knew where it was coming from. So we drove back to my house, and we headed towards the fire because that's where my house was. And we parked outside the house. I took photographs. There's photos in my book uphill, and the fire plume was going right over the top of my house. I knew we were in trouble. I didn't have anything because I just bought the house. So we were leaving to go and get a hose so I could try and protect the house, you know. But the police came, said, you got to get out. So we got evacuated. We got evacuated when the street was on fire. There was a house 4 down from me. Flames were coming out of the window. So we were evacuating as our street was going up in flames. And, you know, this was while my divorce was going on. This was stuff where things were beginning to cascade. And it's anyway. I was on a street with 24 homes. There was 6 left after the forest fire. It was just utter destruction. There was 254 homes in my neighborhood. You know, half a block down from my house was the hottest part of the fire. They reckon that was 2,000 degrees. I mean, the destruction was. Anyone who keeps pushing for wars, you know, go to a forest fire after the destruction and see that. And it was earth shattering to me. And this was while everything else, while my life was cascading, you know, down in a cesspit of hell. This
Oh,
was what was
exactly.
going
And
on.
with the kids and hearing that and just how descriptive you were, and you talk about that too in the book. But you after the then what happens after the fire? I mean, what do you do when you're getting it from all ends?
Oh God, it didn't stop. And people who are listening to this will know, you know, when your back is against the wall, that's when you realize who your true friends are, right? And it's unfortunate. So family members started to come after me, friends came after me, and business partners came after me. They came after me with baseball bats, you know, they start beating you down. You start heading into this black abyss, you know, they start beating you down. And I couldn't live in my house for 5 months. So I'm living in some rental, which I don't like. It was a very small house. That's not why I didn't like it. I didn't like the neighborhood. I didn't like the area, but I knew it was close to where my children had friends. So when I had them, you know, twice a month, weekends, I knew they would have somewhere to go. That was my focus, was how to protect my children through all this, because no one cared. The judge, the lawyers, the system didn't care about my kids. So I had their own mother didn't care about the kids. I had to, you know, try and protect my children. And so I selected a house. I rented a house. I hated the neighborhood, but it was close to where my children could have friends, and I couldn't live in where they could go visit the friends when they came to my house. So I was still alone, right? I mean, I was still alone. But we learned some stuff, because we when my kids were there, I said, look, we're not going to eat watching TV. We're going to sit at the table. We're going to eat like normal people. So we did. We sat at the tables and we had our meals at tables. You know, we didn't eat in separate rooms. We didn't do any of this stuff. I think we came together as 2 children and a father, and we picked a night where my son was allowed to watch certain things on TV, and we had a day and some days where my daughter picked, and that was when I learned to watch SpongeBob, you know, because my daughter likes SpongeBob. You know, you make the most of these devastating situations. And so I was in this rental for 5 months. My house was being fixed, and I knew the weekend was coming. And it was early December. I knew I was going to get into my house on the following Monday on this weekend. So I was preparing. I was filling boxes, and I get to my house. I open the door. There's this musty smell, and I can hear running water. So I'm just coming back after being out for 5 months, and I go downstairs. There's about 4 inches of water. It was the coldest night, that start of the winter, and the contractors had turned the heating off, so a water pipe had frozen. So now I've just dealt with fire damage. Now I have to deal with water damage as well. It was one thing after another. But even when I had a default judgment filed during that period too, because my lawyer wasn't doing anything. So I'm traveling, right? I'm overseas. I come back. I get a note from my lawyer. He calls me while I'm working in Venezuela. He calls me, said, "You come and see me when you get home." So I got home and I sit in his office. He said, "Oh, you've just had a default judgment filed." And he looked at me. He said, "It's exactly what you want in a divorce." I said, "Don't be stupid. That's ridiculous. She's not going to give me what I want in a divorce." And it just cascaded while all this stuff was going on. Things just kept hitting. It kept hitting and hitting and hitting. But I couldn't give up. You know, I just that's the premise of uphill. You just keep going. You can't give up. And even in the book, people do give up, and I know that. And even in my book, I don't use the word suicide, right? And it's not a word it never even came into my head. Although I used to come down mountain passes at over 55 miles an hour. I mean, that's how crazy I was. But I needed that rush. I needed that adrenaline. I needed that excitement, and that was
Mm.
part of keeping going, right? You climb these huge mountain passes with only one strong leg. The other leg, there's no power in it. So I'm climbing these mountain passes with only one leg, and I'm coming back down at over 55 miles an hour, and that's the kind of excitement I needed to keep going. There was some mornings where I didn't want to get out of bed. There was no reason to get out of it, but I had to. I had a company, right? My wife had emptied the bank accounts. I had a company I had employees to pay. And to this day, I'm still proud, despite of all that I was going through. I never defaulted on anybody's paycheck. I didn't get a salary, but I didn't default on anyone else's paycheck because that was important to them. There's things I'm proud of, and there's things I'm not proud of in the book. It's a controversial book, and it was written that way. I wanted it to be controversial, but I was also pretty angry when I wrote it. So but anyway, yeah, a lot went on, and it just never ended. It never stopped. And you asked, how did I deal with it? Well, the deeper I fell into the abyss, the deeper the cesspit of hell I was in. My ambitions, my cycling ambitions, got crazier, and they did. They got the mountain passes I scaled got higher. I did the death ride a couple of times. I nearly did it 3 times, but I did it twice. And the death ride is it's one of the biggest rides in Western America. It's 129 miles. It's 5 mountain passes, and it's 15,000 feet of vertical climbing. I mean, it's a massive ride. When you look at the profile, it's just sawtooth. It's up and down. And I did that, and my my Dr. Watson, the primary surgeon, he said, Jeff, if you do that, I'm going to send you a psychiatrist. And I sometimes wish he'd sent me to a psychiatrist. But I did it. And when I finished it, I went back to his office. I said, I want the name of that psychiatrist. And Dr. Watson, he was a great guy, just brilliant surgeon, and cared. He cared. That's the thing. The people who I worked with, they cared. And he looked at me and said, oh, no, I'm not going to give you the name of the psychiatrist. He said, I'm so proud of you. And, during the period of 2 years and I'm bouncing around here, I'm sorry, the 2 years in physical therapy, when my knee was falling apart the second time, I dissolved a cadaver bone graft. The screws, I was rejecting the screws that was holding the plate that was keeping my knee together. The screws were being pushed out of my skin. My body was rejecting everything the surgeon did. And I just walked away from physical therapy. And Chris Proctor, my physical therapist, he called me up one day and said, where are you? I said, Chris, I can't come anymore. I'm done. He said, no, you're not. He said, you get into this office right now. He didn't know I was crying on the other end of the phone. And I was. Those
It's
were bad
tough.
periods.
Yeah, tough periods. Um, and through this all, as you said, you were so proud that you were able to still meet the payroll. And you have this company, and your company actually, if we take a shortcut, and you can explain more about it, but you fix scientific instruments, right?
Yeah, I got a job in England totally out of the blue. I got this job in England. I worked for the one of the top 4 mass spectrometer manufacturers in the world. There was 4 companies back in the 80s making mass spectrometers, high-end stuff. I mean, this is high-end mass spectrometry, and there was 4 companies. There was 2 in Manchester, and 1 in America, and 1 in Germany. So there was only 4 of them, and I worked for this company, and they trained me really well. And then I started to travel around the world installing this equipment. But I'd been to America in '73. My mother's brother moved to America. He moved to Boston, so I was 11-year-old. '74 we came here. I was 11 years old. We came with my twin brother, and we came to America, and it blew us away. America was totally different to anything we'd experienced in England. It was just magical. It was amazing. And then one of my older brothers moved to. He worked for McDonnell Douglas in down in Southern California in Long Beach, and so we came out on holiday in '79. And a 16-year-old kid coming to California is again. It blew us away. The things we saw. It was just just incredible. Yeah. So I came to America in '86. As soon as I got this job, I knew I wanted to move to America, and I did. I worked for the same company, and they were looking for engineers to travel in America, and it was a huge risk for them. It was a huge risk for me because I was inexperienced, right? And then all of a sudden I
Right.
come to America. I'm an engineer. I'm representing the company that I worked for, and I'm supposed to know what I'm doing. And and sometimes I didn't, but you learn to camouflage stuff. No, not really improvise. You improvise. I improvised a lot because even today there's I can travel to a site and I have to fix their laboratory problems, right? They have issues, and so I get called out. And sometimes I'm overseas. I'm in countries where they don't speak English, and so I have to improvise. Sometimes I don't know what's going on, and I have to look, I have to think, I have to read. I installed some equipment in Russia before all this stuff started in 2022, and I had an instrument. I worked in a small town east of Moscow, 90 kilometers east of Moscow. Well, I didn't know what I was doing. So, they like to drink. So we would go out for dinner, we'd have beer and then we'd have vodka chasers with the beer. And then I'd go back to the hotel and I'd read PDF files and I'd read stuff. So I'd try and educate myself. So I knew what I was doing. So I'd go back in the next day. But it was fascinating to me. But yeah, I buy and sell equipment. I teach people how to use it, and I fix. I'm an electronic engineer, and so I come from an era where I still fix to component level, and sometimes I would. One client in Denver asked me, "Can you do something for a piece of equipment I'd never seen before in my life?" I said, "What do you want?" So he told me. So I designed the circuit. I went to a local store, bought all the parts. I made this circuit board, installed it in his instrument, and made it work. It's exciting to me. I still get kicks out of it. Maybe it's the satisfaction, right? I get satisfaction out of what I'm doing, and I think that's part of recovery from I could go into management, I could work for another company, but I don't want to. I don't like that. I used to have an office in just north of New York. We had 9 people working there, and I quit my engineering. I had to fly out twice a month to New York, and I became a human resources guy. And it's not what I want to do. It's not what I like. I've won an award in South America for some of my work, and I published a paper in '89 that was world renowned, it was world class stuff that was going on. I get a kick still out of doing that. Maybe that's also part of my recovery. I have the cycling and I have my work, and when I was in Venezuela, I was doing work down there for PDVSA, the oil company, and I got invited down there. And when I went down, there was an English guy working at the oil company. Pure coincidence, but that was 4 days after my wife filed for divorce, and I went down there. I did my work. I came back. I told them what needs to be done, and I got invited down again in '07, and I finished my work. And the guy down there, we're still friends. He read uphill. He said, "Jeff," he said, I didn't know all that stuff, personal stuff was going on in your book. And it's a word I use in uphill, compartmentalize. I was able to put the chaos that was going on in my life, stick it in my head, the same area where common sense is, because I don't access that either. But I was able to do astonishing work that I'm really proud of. And he said, you didn't give that impression that your life was cascading into hell. You did. He said, I've never seen anyone work so hard in my life, and that's how I was. That's how I was able to get through what I did, and I'm proud of that. There was a lot of stuff going on in my life, but I'm proud of how I came through it. And to say I'm not changed, it's impossible. I'm not the same person, but I have a plaque right here. Things turn out best for those who make the best of the way things turn out, and that's how it is, right? You've got to make. It's not how it used to be, but it never will be. It took a long time for me to get over that, but I'm happy where I am now, and I was able to start writing. Out of this abstract chaos came creativity, right? After in a pile of ashes that was my life, I saw a plant growing. There was some greenery, there's some shrub growing. So I moved the ashes out the way and I started pouring water on it, started feeding this plant, and the plant starts growing. And that's the metaphor for life, isn't it? You got to keep looking for an avenue that will keep you going. Someone very close to me, he committed suicide, and wow, all he had to do was call me up. He saved my life. He was one of the surgeons. He saved my life. Just
Wow. Wow. And that's
call me up, tell me.
yeah. And wow, and your story, it really is inspiring. And it really, I think people listening, you hear what they hear what you've gone through and how you were able to keep doing it, keep figuring it out. You had kids, you had the fire, you had all these things that happened to you, the wild divorce. Wow. And then, as you said, the creativity opens up. You start writing, right? Here you are fixing scientific instruments and you have a brain for figuring things out. And you come up with this novel, Biological Deception. Tell us about that. How'd that happen?
Uh, how long?
How
Two
long do
hours
I
left? Do we
have?
have? That's another. It's fascinating to me. All this is fascinating. I've found another avenue, and um, I'm going to make everybody laugh here, but I failed English in high school. Right? I'm doing chemistry. I'm doing physics. I'm doing mathematics. They're the three subjects I need to get into university, and I think what do I need English for? I was very lazy in high school. I did enough to get my passes. I was very lazy in university. I did enough to get my degree, and I later learned that's a sign of intelligence. But I'm not so sure about that. But anyway, I started. People told me, professionals. My lawyer told me, through my divorce, I had 6 lawyers. That's how stupid it was. But through my lawyer said you got to purge your head. And other professionals, I didn't go to psychologists. I couldn't afford them. I didn't have the money, and I didn't want to talk in front of somebody and then they turn around and say, "Well, that's a stupid thing to do," and "Oh, you shouldn't have done that." Well, I know that already. I don't need to pay somebody, $200 an hour to tell me I did stupid decisions. I know that already. But anyway, so they told me to purge my head. So I did. I started writing. And people who are listening, take some time and write a paragraph or write a chapter about your life, who you are. I was told it's one of the hardest subjects to write about is to write about yourself. So I started writing, and I didn't know how to write. Is it me, or am I a third person? I didn't know how to write. But anyway, I started compiling. And one of the things I learned, people have heard me talk before, they'll know what I'm about to say, but I read Jaws when the book came out. Before the movie, came out in 75, I read Jaws, and the first chapter is stunning. You can't read the first chapter and put the rest of the book down. It's impossible. So that's how I write. I pick, so when I wrote Uphill, okay, what's going to entice somebody to continue reading the book? So I picked a segment in my life that I call it the preface, the preface. It gets people interested. So I picked a topic, my cycling. The fifth pass of the death ride. It's a stunning achievement, really, when you got one leg. But so I started writing this manuscript, and when I'd finished, it took a couple of years to do. And when I'd finished it, it was 110,000 words, right? Well, the average book size is 60,000, so it's almost a double book. It was just, but the manuscript was chaos too, because my life was chaos, right? So I called up a friend. I don't know what to do with it. I called a friend. She said, you know my sister-in-law. She's a renowned editor, and I did. I knew, but I didn't know to send her the book. So I sent her the manuscript. She sent it off. She read it. She said, "Jeff, this is phenomenal. You got to do something with it." So I wrote this manuscript not knowing where it would go. And it was professionals in the industry that told me, "You've got to do something with it." She said, Claire, she edited the book. She said, "Jeff, I'm going to send it off to a professional writer." Well, she wouldn't tell me who the writer was. She wouldn't release that name, but I paid the guy some money to read the manuscript, and he critiqued it. Obviously, there was things that weren't right with it, but he critiqued it. But the important things was, he said, "Jeff, you've got a story that'll resonate with readers. That's number one." He said, "I love your writing style. It's readable. It's legible. People can understand what you're saying, but you've got to do X, Y, and Z. Well, even then, Claire told me, she said, Jeff, that might have put people off too, because having to do X, Y, and Z, they don't want to do it. Well, I did, once I realized that people wanted to read my story and it has some benefit, this, anyway, sorry, I'm losing a word here, but it has potential, right? It has potential to help people, help other people. So we re-edited the book. I mean, it had to be because it was all over the place. So I printed the thing out. It was about 500 pages, and I put it into sections. There's 5 different sections, and I actually kept the sections in the book. It was important. It was the only way I could edit what was going on, right? And I turned it into sections, and I printed this. I got this book, right? And when I'm going through all that I'm going through, I'm crying every night. When I'm writing the book, I'm in tears. When Claire was editing it, she would send me sections that would have me bawling like a baby. I mean, it was phenomenal. And I don't mince words, right? It's dramatic. I'm very clear in my writing. I don't gloss over things, and I think I'm honest, and I think that's what people like about the book. But anyway, it was published, and then a year later, it was nominated for an award, and it's it's shocking to me. I didn't expect any of this, but that's where the writing came from. And my, out of chaos comes creativity. And my lawyer, I kept saying, James, I've written this book. He said, "Oh, it's a pipe dream, Jeff. Just move on with your life." And I sent him a copy. He read it, and it stunned him. It shocked him, and he said, "Jeff, you'd write a good thriller." And he wasn't the first person to say that. Other readers read it and said, "Jeff, you'd write a good thriller." And to this day, I don't know where that genre change came from. I still don't understand, except I travel a lot and I bring a lot of the stories overseas into my book. Maybe that's where that came from. But people told me I could write a thriller, and that's where biological deception, the concept came from. Okay, I can write a book. Now, what do I write about? That's the other thing. Yeah, you can write a thriller. Okay, what do I write about? So I had an experience. I got a call from a Serbian guy, and he wanted me to test a diamond in Namibia. And we talked about this a few days ago when you called me, and but readers haven't heard the story. So I thought, well, this will make a good beginning because the guy was found hanging in his bedroom 3 weeks later. So I never got to go out and test this diamond. And to this day, I don't, they called it suicide, but was it? I don't know. The diamond industry is so controlled. Who knows? I have no idea, but I thought, okay, that would make a good story, right? And so again, I went back to Jaws. I had to, because I'm a new author, I'm a new writer, I have to get the readers engaged from the first word, right? The first chapter, I have to get the readers engaged. And all my books are like that. So they're exciting. There's things going on. There's assassinations, there's chases, there's also explosions. There's all sorts of going on in my first chapters in the books because I want to get the readers engaged and enthralled. And they turn into page turners then. And, that's how they've been described. They're a page turner. And so that's how I got the first, but that's how I got biological going. But I didn't know where it was heading. The first few chapters are quite exciting, but I didn't have a story yet. And then COVID-19 was happening, right? And I'm not going to get into that nonsense. But anyway, so so a friend sent me a video. It was a short 5-minute video, and it was how governments plan on taking over the population, right, and control the people. And I thought, that's great. That's fantastic. I read that. I watched it again a couple of times. I watched this 5-minute video. I knew exactly where my story was going to go. And I spent the next 3 weeks. Spent the next 3 weeks just compiling this book. It took about 3 weeks to write because I couldn't stop. I knew where it was going, and the book allowed me to bring in personal experiences too. And I'll spoil it if I tell you what the experiences are. But there's a lot of personal stuff in the book, and it allowed me to do that, and yeah, it was crazy. And when I had it printed, and it was printed in 2020, it was published in 2020, I read it. I couldn't put it down. I started reading. Well, this is a really good story. I'm the author. I have to say that, right? But readers now are telling me this is a really good story. I've had professional reviewers have looked at the book and they've sent me phenomenal reviews of the book, 5-star ratings, and they're comparing it to Robert Ludlum and the late John le Carre and Tom Clancy and people
Wow.
like that. I can't make that connection. I can't say, yeah, I'm like them. I have my own writing style, but when people compare, when professionals who are reviewing my book, when they say your books are like X, Y, and Z, like these prolific authors. It's quite a accolade. It's yeah, it's remarkable to me. I keep saying I'm stunned, but
Yeah,
it's remarkable. But I think the other thing is and then the Ukraine war started, right? And I started to learn things. I started to learn more stuff about what was going on in Ukraine. And a lot of this was hidden. Tucker Carlson tried to bring it up, but he got fired from Fox News. So I started to read into it. And there was more material, biological deception. I have this clever ability. One of the reviewers said, you close the book and you think, wow, this can happen. That's my style of writing. That's how I wanted the book to be. When the reader closes the last page, reads the last page, I want them to put the book down and go, wow, that could happen. So it's fiction, but I have a clever ability to muddy the boundaries between fiction and reality, and I do. I'm for some reason, this ability to create stories that merge fiction and reality is done on purpose. But I got that out of all the chaos that was in my life. So, but when the Ukraine war started, I got some more information. So, Reader's Magnet were involved, and I rewrote. I had a 10,000 words, right? I had the 25 pages, but it didn't change the story. I didn't change the story. I added to it. I enhanced the story. So again, I'm clever in that I can predict certain things. And in my two other thrillers that are part of the trilogy, I'm predicting events that happen later, a few years later. My second thriller is AI. It was written in 2021. Well, now robots and AI are all over the place. They're in the
right.
news every day. So I did a second edition of Biological Deception. I enhanced what was going on. I was very perceptive, but the biological weapons have been developed around the world, right? This is going on. There's treaties, there's world treaties, there's UN treaties, there's all sorts saying you can't do this. But
Right.
sorry, countries are doing this. They're actually doing this, and so I added more wording to enhance my book, and it does. It didn't change the story. I was very perceptive. I was on the right track. I just didn't go deep enough. So I did a second edition, and that's how my stories are. And the other thing, um, I created a character. I wanted to create a character that readers would like, right? So I created this character, and he's been shaped. I made him shaped by events that have happened in his life. So it's like me, events have happened in my life. So now he's shaped and he's controlled, and he's pretty emotional. I mean, even when uh, I had to edit the second edition, right? And even I'm in tears in some of the chapters because I make them pretty emotional because he's emotional. When you go through traumatic events in your life, you have no control over your emotions. You just your body chemistry is changed, and I
Right.
made the character like like that too. I made him. People say it's me, but my neighbor, I gave copies of my thriller trilogy to my neighbor, and then I get this cryptic text message. He said, "Hey Daniel, I really liked your books," and it came from an iCloud account. I didn't know who it was. I said, "Who's this?" He said, "It's your neighbor Bob." It's like, whoa! He sent me this cryptic message, but it's not me. Except um, I had the pleasure of meeting Lee Child a couple of years ago, and Lee Child wrote the he wrote the Jack Reacher series, right? And
Yeah.
he's a really nice guy, really down to earth. I mean, I don't know how many books he's sold, but he was approachable, right? He went to the same university I did. I didn't know that. He went to University of Sheffield in England. But I met him in Manhattan. There was an alumni event, and he was the a guest speaker. And when I found out he was the guest speaker, I said, okay, I want to go, right? So I went and I met him, I talked to him, and when you're writing all these books, when you're including the same character on all these books, you have to know the character.
Right.
So you have to know his personality. You have to know how he's going to react. You can't change the person. If the trilogy, I wrote a trilogy, so Daniel Cross has to stay the same in the trilogy. He
Right.
can't be 6'4" in one book and 5'8" in another book,
Sure.
right? He can't be,
Yeah.
200 pounds in one book and 250 pounds in another. You got to keep the character
Consistent.
consistent.
Yeah.
And I asked Lee Child, I said, the character is you, and except the guy is tall, right? Jack Reacher is tall. Well, Lee
Sure.
Child is, he's above me. His head is above my head. He's a tall guy. So you got to pick a personality that so you can keep it
Keep it.
consistent.
Yeah.
And I did. So
Wow.
people think it's me, but it's not me, except he travels and biological deception. I love how he's able to communicate when he goes to foreign countries. He can communicate with people who have different cultures, different languages, different personalities. And that's how I am when I travel overseas. I have that ability. I'm very good at it. When I was in the lab in Venezuela, I had people who couldn't speak English. I had them laughing their heads off. When I was installing a machine in this lab in Russia, the first day I have people laughing their heads off.
Right.
We're all the same in the end, right? Take away the politicians, all the people are the same. We're the
Yep.
same worldwide. We're just
Right.
different language, different culture, but people are people. And I love that in biological deception. I bring that out very well. He's able to communicate with these people who want to take over the world, right? He's able to deal with them and handle them and talk on their level and
Yeah.
make them comfortable with him. And that's how I am. The book allowed me to express myself, right?
Right.
It's full of emotion and passion, and it
Right.
it helped me escape. It helped me escape.
Which is the best. And a perfect place to end this. Jeff Bott, thank you so much.
I it's I don't know what to say. It's a real pleasure. I'd say I'm lost for words, but you don't want me lost for words. But it's been a pleasure being on this show, and I want to express my sincere thank you for everything. I mean, you have faith in what I'm trying to do, and I appreciate that more than anything.